people are starting to sign on as we go along. So, welcome everyone to the session about negotiations and the skills around that. And Joanne Johnson, thank you for being here and taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this with us.
Oh, well, listen, thank you. This is good.
So we're gonna do this very much like a just question and conversation session, a little less formal. And at the very end, when we're ready to wrap up, I'll leave it for open questions through the chat feature on the webinar, and then I will be asking those questions to Joanne. So everyone will be on mute just so we can respect the time of everyone else. So we're going to begin, and I'm going to start off with just getting to know you and your business, Joanne. So, what has been your history? Have you always sold real estate?
No, well, so I got my license late 2007, and I was motivated to get my license really to be an assistant to a realtor. And so we kind of talked and said, I had two young kids. I wasn't looking to go back to work. It's just we got to know each other through a mutual friend. And I said, yeah, in my next life, I'd love to be a realtor and so on and so forth. And she's still an active realtor in the Woodlands, Mary Boatner, and I love her. And she's a great mentor, a great person. Anyway, so we both agreed for me to be effective to help her very part-time. Why don't I get my license? So that's how that started. So I got my license, and she, at the time that she hung her name, was Coldwell Banker United. And so I just fell into Coldwell Banker that way. I got my license, and then the funny thing is they ended up leaving, like a month later. And I said, oh, well, I signed up for the classes, and she said, okay, well, when you finish the class, that I would go and join. Well, then things started happening really by early 2008. So
Okay,
that's how I got into it.
so you started in 2007, so that was really less. You're going on your 10-year here shortly.
Yeah,
Um,
it'll be 9 years this fall. Yep.
Congratulations. I like to ask this question because we do have a lot of newer agents on the call and all mix of levels. Yet, have you ever actually wanted to quit real estate?
Well, good. Well, I mean, so my first year, of course, 2008, I had nowhere to go but up. That's like all of us, right, when we get started. And again, I wasn't planning on getting my license and going blazing saddles by myself, but I kind of fell into it when, I let my sphere know what I was doing, and then the Mary Boatner, the Boatner group left Coldwell Banker, but I had a listing and I picked up a buyer at an open house. So did I ever feel like quitting? I'll tell you, by the second year, of course, the economy fell out in the late, fall of, or the fall of 2008. 2009, in my second year, that summer, I do recall that summer of 2009. I was very thankful, grateful. I was having fun, felt the reward of what I was doing. Loved, was very intrigued with real estate, negotiating deals, and that really served my why of helping people. But I was quickly becoming a little bit overwhelmed. I realized how important it was to have systems and structure to your business. And it took me probably another 6 to 9 months before I hired my first person, which was very nerve-wracking for me because I was still, we're all students. I mean, I'm still learning every day, right? But my second year in real estate, and even to be thinking about hiring someone to help me, I felt an enormous responsibility. How am I going to do that? What if this is just a fluke and I'm busy right now, but what if I can't afford that person and I don't want to let them down? So I don't know that I felt about quitting, but I was feeling burnt out. I mean, that second year, I was already starting to refer out some, you just physically can't. I needed to get some boundaries to my business and everything, and I was causing my own pain really because I was teaching my clients that I was 24/7, and I didn't have healthy boundaries.
Good afternoon, Word of Life. This is Marna.
So I love that you say that, and I know this isn't a question I wrote yet. So what did you end up doing at that moment? How did you end up not being overwhelmed?
You kind of grind through it, right? So I mean, like I was, my business to this day is very organic by referral. I don't even know what Boomtown and some of these things are, but I'm not really like your Zillow agent and da da da. So I'm really through my sphere, and that of course has grown, very grateful for that. But I always say we wake up unemployed every day. I'm only as good as yesterday. And so you can't ever get, ahead of yourself that way. '09 was a rough, it was a busy, busy, busy summer. I had lots of buyers that I was working with, very excited to work with them, but I, I look back, I was a mess. I didn't have a day off, you know what I mean? It was just like I was going all over the place. And my husband really helped me by that fall and that winter when it turned to 2010. He was just like, I was getting to a point too. I'm like, I don't know if this is worth it. I mean, like, I really, was kind of interested in real estate, but really as a part-time gig. And then now I'm going kind of a little bit crazy here. And so he really, he put it out on Woodlands Online. And I'll tell you, my first hire, I'm very, very blessed because she really helped me put the pillars to my business, and we worked really hard. My broker, we really there was no template for. I felt like we were building a spaceship at times. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, surely there weren't a lot of examples of teams. So there was Beth Ferrister. Um, I really wasn't aware of any teams. You know what I mean? I didn't know how do you do this? What do I pay her? What is she supposed to do? You know what I mean? So anyway, I was just very fortunate because she was very business minded, and I'm very close to her to this day, but very thankful.
That's awesome. And so, can we give a snapshot of what your business looks like right now? Like, where are you at 2016 end of year, and then what your goals are for this year, and what your team structure looks like?
So where are we in business right now? We're really consistent with where we were at this time last year. And but I'll tell you that that gives me like a nervous twitch a little bit. Not really, but it's like we finished the year, I think a little under 44 million. Don't quote me on that. 43, 44 million. That was not 2015 was not our best year ever. And we are not numbers driven. Again, we're a very organic business. I do believe that if you take care of your client, the rest will fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for the infrastructure that we built and staffing and everything, I, remained very loyal to my entire staff. Um, you know, I, but that was not our best year. My trajectory had always gone up, and we felt, and probably not unlike I've talked to other top producers here, but I think some felt a little cooling off of their business as well in 2015. My thing is that regardless of what the market does, there's always opportunity. There's always opportunity. And so I guess the Jim Collins book, From Good to Great. I mean, good is the enemy of great. Good is the enemy of great. So we've got to be better than good. And so I think every day it's kind of like I'm not, I don't know that we've ever reached our potential, and that's the good news. So there's always room to get better. So right now we're on pace. I just looked at numbers. Every week I get it on my desk at a glance, but we're a little under 13 million for the year, and so I expect though that we'll finish with what we have very strong, but that's up to us. So
Absolutely.
anyway, I love what we do because if you want to raise, you just look in the mirror.
Yeah, I love that. And so, how many on your team right now, Joanne, and what are those positions?
I have two other agents. Um, I have two other agents on my team. There was a third agent. He's going back to school. He helps us out just very part-time, really, right now. So really and truly, two other agents. Very proud to work with both of them, Kelly Hartfeld and Andy Brahms, a veteran. She's fantastic. And then three staff people.
Okay.
So I've got a transaction coordinator, a personal assistant who also does marketing, and then my listing manager.
I I don't want to mute. There's someone I'm not muting and someone I am. So let me test this out real quick, Joanne. Let's see if I
Okay.
mute you. Have I muted you?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. So I muted at someone else. Okay. Awesome. So thank you for the intro. I feel like we can people
Yeah, because I don't.
understand your world and where we're at. Let's go into the conversation around negotiation. And when I was coming up with these questions, it wasn't the easiest to do because negotiations can mean so many things in so many different parts of the process. So let's just start with how does someone become a great negotiator in your perspective?
I don't want anything. Just whatever.
Well, good question. I mean, I don't know how do they become a good one. I think there's a little bit of intuition there. I think there's a little bit of what just innate your personality type, you know. Um, and I think experience, you know what I mean? So I think the trap, or I don't want to say the danger or trap, but when you're so my former life, I was a state farm property claim manager, and I handled, attorney negotiating, the lawsuits and different things for State Farm. That was my past experience. And so, I think you've got to be a little bit savvy. You've got to think outside of the box. You've got to be a creative person. You've got to be a really, really good, um, like puzzles, right? You put together pieces of the puzzle. And I think when you're learning a new trade, like real estate, you learn the contract and things like that. But I guess my advice would be to, it's not even advice. I mean, take it for what it's worth. You could, file 13 it or whatever. But my thing is that there's no template. There's no template for there's every blank in the contract outside of the legal description of the property and the legal names of the parties. Every blank is negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in, like, for instance, the very dynamic market that we came out of, one thing that, I saw and experienced a lot was that you got to know your client, you got to know your players. Are you there?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, my screen is okay. Um, so you've got to know your players and your client and all of that. And what I mean by that is that you've got to know where you have opportunity for the gain, for the benefit of your client. And so understand that, like, the very dynamic market that we came out of, what I was going to say is, when we would ask in multiple offer situations, and we still have them. I just encountered one a few months ago on a property, highest and best. And, sometimes, someone's response, an agent's response might be like going, well, we're giving you, over asking price. I'm like, um, look at the option period, look at your option money. Do you need the financing approval? All these things. Do you need that contingency? You know what I mean? There's so many ways that you can color a contract, so to speak.
I love that. And you said know your players in the game. So can you kind of go deeper into that? Who are the players and what are you looking at when you do that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, represent sellers and buyers. My sellers sometimes, frankly, if they're home, I love to talk to and with appraisers about unprecedented value. I mean, like, if we always by definition an appraisal is based on historical data, meaning, obviously recent solds and all that. But listen, market value is it's not a science. It's not a science. It is an art. I mean, because it's in the eye of the beholder, and you absolutely have to use comps to indicate value. But the older a home is, obviously any hardscape things that are added to it. Anyways, you have to judge that individual home for what it is. And when I say know your client, you've got to understand, like, okay, the product is the home, whether you're buying it or selling it. And for a seller, if you've got a really great home where there's an appetite from the market for that product, sometimes it's kind of like, what's the risk tolerance? Getting to know your client is, their timeline, they're better served, obviously, always, to go up and down on the market. But, knowing your client and then really educating them, helping them understand what the strategy is. There's always a strategy in everything you do. There has to be a strategy for every home that you walk up to, whether you're representing the buyer or representing the seller. Does
Great.
that answer the question?
Yes, perfectly. And so I've had this been presented to me a few times from newer agents, and I would love your thoughts on this, especially because I know you do a lot of listings. I when they have a client who wants to make an offer and the value, because you said the value is in the um, perceived by the buyer. It might be the appraiser can give it one thing, but you have to know the client. If a client wants to offer more than what the agent is pulling comparables for, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, there could be a number of reasons for that. Again, there's no such thing as a cookie cutter home, even when you're talking about production built homes, unless it's brand new construction. There's no such thing as, I hate talking in averages, you know what I mean? Because there's different nuances around that. So, like working with a buyer who really wants the home, they may really want the home. You give them counsel, maybe you do feel like it's overpriced for X, Y, and Z reasons. But you also have to help them with, what is the square footage? What is the lot orientation? Is this a premium lot? Is it oversized lot? Does it back up to a green belt? Da da da. Is it a smaller floor plan? A smaller floor plan, just, if you think about it, just the pool of buyers are typically going to be a little bit larger because of the affordability of that home. You're casting a larger net. So if you have that discussion with your buyer about, hey, this does look a little bit, it might be, you might feel like it's overpriced, or it is showing a higher price per square foot for these reasons. Now, let's just say you just, as the agent, like, it's overpriced. I mean, obviously, you have to have a strategy in counseling them if they still really want it. What are their means for, you know, um, I guess the shortstop for them is frankly the appraisal. The appraisal is a standalone contingency. And I
Mm-hmm.
will tell you, when I represent sellers, we have our private conversation of, if we have stretched the price because of this, that, and the other, maybe, there is, we're not looking for dollar for maybe improvements and those things. But do we feel like there is an appetite, meaning is there a demand, for this product? Yes. And again, appraisals, there's always going to be, unprecedented value. There just is. That bell curve does go up. If we lived in yesterday, then if you think about it, homes would never appreciate.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean,
So
if you always kind of operated on, like, well, I don't know, the average price per square foot or the highest price per square foot is only 118. Well, if we did that on every property, you just said, all right, there's the magic number, 118 a square foot. That, you know what I mean? That's not the real world.
absolutely. It really bothers me when agents say average price per square foot. My agents know not to bring that word to or that phrase to me. Um,
Right.
so since we're on this topic, and I know appraisals are always a discussion around negotiation. So let's say that an appraisal does come in low. Do you have a strategy? And we need both sides' perspectives here, of what you do to negotiate around that.
Well, again, behind the scenes, if I'm representing the seller and the appraisal comes in low, it doesn't appraise, the property doesn't appraise. I can guarantee you I've already, more than likely, unless it's just a really bad appraisal and it's just out of left field, and sometimes that's happened, but we've had great success with getting properties appraised. But let's just say, well, maybe we've stretched value a little bit because it is an oversized lot. It has these updates, condition, features, all these things, whatever, and it comes in short. Well, I can guarantee I've already managed the expectations, though, for the sellers of, like, all right, we're shooting for the moon, but we may be among the stars here, you know. But with that doesn't mean we just automatically concede price. I'm going to look at the appraisal, So the protocol then would be it doesn't appraise. I get a copy of the appraisal. We look and see if we agree with the comparables. If we agree with the comparables, well, before we ever get there, we look at the square footage. Because
Hmm.
sometimes, and that's really important, I think, when you're listing property. I mean, the tax records are not wholly reliable. So, you know, I always sit down with them, the seller, and just say, do we have any reason to believe that your square footage is not what the tax records reflect for X, Y, or Z reasons? Maybe they've refinanced, we've got a better building sketch, et cetera, et cetera. We've got builder plans, whatever the case may be. Because obviously that's what's originally permitted by the builder is what the tax record, what the county has. So, was the appraisal thrown off because of a shortfall in square footage? Number one, was something missed? I've seen that too, where, yep, it came in short and the square footage was off, but they missed something in the square footage too. You know what I mean? So that, and then you look at the comparables. Do we agree with the adjustments made, superior, inferior features, and you just start combing through it that way. So,
Okay, and what
and then
about
part of
from the
sometimes
buyer?
the negotiation, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, what about from the buyer's perspective?
Well, so from the buyer's perspective, when it comes in short, again, it depends on what hat you're wearing. If I'm representing a buyer, I really kind of put pressure on the seller. Now, when I'm representing sellers, I would say that we're prepared. I mean, I can think very seldom, frankly, when I've had a surprise with an appraisal. You know what I mean? So I would say like we're prepared. Um, and again, we've had great success as well where there's not been anything that's even touched, comps have touched what our asking price and sales price is, and we've been successful getting it appraised because that home, and I understand, we've got to understand the playing field of just appraisers living within the four corners of a document and being rated by how many exceptions they make and all these things. I get it. But, again, sometimes you have to help the appraiser climb that ladder with you in what the value is of that home. And so, you really leave nothing for chance with that. I believe really it's very helpful to provide information for the appraiser. But representing a buyer, that's a different hat. Obviously, I'm trying to get them the best deal of the century. I mean, there is something to be said for selling high and buying low,
Yeah.
right? Um, so we turn it around and we use that to our advantage if
Oh,
it doesn't. But at the same time, you don't, yes, they can walk out with their earnest money. You don't want your buyer though to have, you know, from the very beginning. You also have to manage expectations with your buyer. Walking up to a home and maybe it's priced over what you think is, all these things. And yes, the appraisal is a standalone contingency, but you don't want them to spend their money on inspections and option money and all these things just to, lose it. Yes, they could walk away with their earnest money if we don't renegotiate and reach an agreement, but that's what the value of a good agent is. It's really counseling both sides
mhm.
with the sometimes extreme scenarios of what could happen.
That's great. So let's move into the offer conversation. I feel like I'm echoing now.
No,
um,
I hear you.
okay, good. So let's go into making an offer on a home from the buyer side of things. And I know we touched on this, that every blank is negotiable, but are there some techniques or tips that you would say helps your negotiation process on an offer?
I think you always put it in the large context, right? So negotiations, number one, you just want it to be a really, fair and professional dialogue. Sportsmanship is what I talk about on my team. I think being a good sportsman is really, we're professionals, not hystericals. I mean, so I think in the context of everything, negotiations is a give and take. It's a give and take. So when you know for your, again, back to knowing your client, if it's really important for your buyer, that price or to have the win, quote unquote, on price, um, and for valid reasons. Again, those are very individual to each buyer. Again, we could go shoe shopping. I could spend $400 on a pair of shoes. I'll turn that around. You could spend $400 on a pair of, I don't spend $400 on a pair of shoes, but let's just say you spend $400 on a pair of shoes. I'd be like, wow, you're not, I mean, but if it's worth it to you, then, you know, that's where shoemakers and designers and brands and all that, they can put their shoes out there at a certain price because they know the public. Nike, they will love it. They'll eat it up. So give and take. So, you know, representing a buyer, writing an offer, if we're going to be really aggressive on price, then, but we really love the home and want the home, and we, you know, in earnest, we're going to follow through with this home. And it's not, we're not lukewarm about it, like, well, we like it, but we just haven't seen anything else. No, if it's like fits all their needs, priorities, but for X, Y, and Z reasons, we're just going to be really, you know, we're going to start out being aggressive on price, our offer. Number one, I hate arbitrary offers. I always tell my buyers, we've got to show competency of the market. We can't just arbitrarily pull a number out of the sky and, you know, act like we're just going to whack the seller in the knees today. You know, we've got to substantiate where we're coming from. And you start by giving honor, you know, give honor for what the things that your buyer really likes. But in the context of give and take, um, you know, you can come in stronger in option money. You can put forth more serious earnest money. Maybe you need a longer closing date. You can utilize the, you know, to put down additional earnest money once they're past their financing approval deadline. I mean, there's a lot of ways to set it up.
So I love that you say you come in with a fair perspective because I think that a lot of client agents feel like they have to do everything from the buyer's perspective if that's who they're representing. So, can you talk about what makes you have that perspective and approach to your business?
You meaning the conversations you have with your buyer?
Yes, because if let's just say you have a buyer, and we'll put it in a scenario. The buyer comes in and says, I want to offer, let's just say it's a $400,000 house. I want to offer 350, and I want them to pay for title. I want them to pay for HOA docs. I want to only pay $100 in option fee. I want 12 days of option. Like they sit there and they want everything to their favor to present to the seller. What is your perspective on that?
No, I'm just kidding. Well, okay, so a couple of things. You're the expert,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have to present yourself as that. And you know, I always say, don't take what I'm saying when, you know, when I'm representing buyers. And I used to heavily work with buyers and, you know, everybody, because I had no team until 2013, really. So for a number of years, I worked all sides of it, right? So, but you're the expert. I mean, so, and you back up what you're saying to your client with market data. You back it up with market data. Um, I've seen that sometimes with, you know, with some agents, either, you know, maybe on my team, you know, whatever else, but we work through kind of like the training part of it. But it's you don't just say like, well, the average sold price and list price is about, you know, 3% off or 5% off, so let's start here. For me, I would be one tough customer. That would not be good enough for me. You know what I mean? So you have to educate them. You are, the agent is the expert. And I think having a really good rapport. I'm very fortunate. I mean, again, we have a very organic business, meaning that these are people that are, you know, 3 points or 2 points or 1 point of distance from me, meaning my friends or a friend of a friend or a past client. So there's already, or we quickly get to that rapport and trust. You know what I mean? So that if you're doing your job, they trust you. They trust what you're telling them.
So then maybe a $200 isn't as big of a negotiation to them, or putting down more earnest money. They trust your professional advice.
Yeah, but I think back to that price thing. 350, if they're wanting to offer 350,000 on a $400,000 home, number one, we have to look at the subject property. The 400,000, is it overpriced? I mean, listen, sellers overreach, on price. So, but if they haven't, if their asking price of 400 reconciles with the market, and your buyer is wanting to start 50,000 under that, which just in quick math is 12%, under an asking, you would have to have a basis for that. Is there a lot of deferred maintenance on the home? Is it that something's going on there? If it's just they are lowballing, I think you have to have a serious talk, because you could end up wasting your time, with this buyer too, by writing 12 offers on 12 different properties. And that's not. I think you have to kind of get to, again, you're the expert. You have to kind of get to that common understanding, with your client. That's what they've hired you for, is to give you advice and to give them advice and counsel. That is your job, to advise and counsel them if you feel like it's a lowball offer,
So
And if we're starting really low, again, I think we have to, you have to substantiate that. All right, help me understand. Yeah, it is, it's a 20-year-old roof. It's a da-da-da. Yet there's some rotted siding on the back of the garage. I mean, there's these things. It looks like they've had a water spot, but it's in the neighborhood, the location, the schools, whatever you want. I mean, so it might be justified to be really aggressive. But if it's not, don't let them rule you. You are the one that should be driving the train.
absolutely. So let's go into a scenario again. So if you're in the offer stage and there's one item, and let's take it as, I've seen this one a lot lately. Who pays for HOA subdivision docs? Let's say that is the final decision to make an offer executed. How would you handle that? And let's do it from the listing perspective.
Well, I think you're familiar with the situation of reason here, but yeah, it depends on who you're representing. You try to get the best deal that you can for the respective party. You advocate for that respective party. You know what I mean? What's customary and standard? Is this just needling the other side? Don't needle the other side unnecessarily with smaller issues. But I mean, you hold your ground, and
because on the scale of going to torture, it was
you until you reach that breaking point. You don't know that breaking point until someone just says no. I mean, that's a deal breaker for me. So until someone tells me that's a deal breaker, then I'm going to do what I think is in the best interest of my client.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of fast forward into the process to the inspection, because I know that's another big negotiation piece of the contract. So I'm not going to give a scenario yet, but can you go through maybe some situations that you've dealt with around negotiating inspection items?
Well, it's, and I don't mean to make this sound like a boxing match, because it's not. Really, our job is to build bridges, not to blow them up, right? So, but in the context of the anatomy, if you will, of a contract, to me, there's 3, potentially 4, rounds. Okay, so the first round is negotiating the contract. Every blank. Second round is inspections.
See you tomorrow.
So inspections. By the time you get to inspections, both seller and buyer feel like they've given up usually something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So sellers feel like, well, I mean, buyer might think, like, gosh, I gave them their price. They got the win. Now I'm really going to be, I'm going to expect this home is going to be perfect. So it's all in the context of the offer. If the buyer's given the seller their asking price and their closing date terms and all of that. Listen, I prepare sellers sometimes. Hey, listen, not that we're going to yield to everything the buyer asks for. We're not. We're going to look at what's broken, unsafe, or failing. And in the context of what was code at the time the home was built, what wasn't code at the time the home was built. So, but a buyer will feel more entitled The more that they give the seller in round one, round two, usually you're going to see the buyer say like, hey, listen, I'm not going to put up with that leak on the water heater, and I do want this caulked or whatever the case may be. You know what I'm saying? So I think inspections are always in the context of how round one, you know, uh, how that went, and does that make sense?
Yeah, and so I'm going to get on a specific one right now because I know that in this area we have a lot of 10, 12, 15, even 20-year-old homes. I see a lot of inspections of the roof is at its end of its life. What are your thoughts from if a how a buyer's agent discuss that with a client? Because obviously the buyer is now probably nervous because that's a big expense to them that will be coming up, yet is not quite ready, and yet it's not it doesn't need replaced. It's not leaking yet. So how would you approach a roof showing up at the end of its life?
Well, here's the thing. You would not be just discovering that, I hope, during the inspection period, right? So you have seller's disclosures up front when you're making the offer and negotiating the offer, and that roof and asking, I think, questions up front. And, again, we don't inspect it necessarily up front, but you know what you're getting in for right up front, with the roof age, condition, et cetera. That's really important. In other words, that roof and the age should not be a surprise during the inspection period. Now, if it's a tight roof and performing its integrity, which is keeping water out of the house, I mean, that's a component that you've counseled and prepared your buyers for. Like, all right, well, let's, inspection wise, let's get a roof inspector out there. But some questions I would be asking up front, looking at seller's disclosures and realizing it's an older roof. Hey, listing agent, have they, we've had several weather events. Did they turn in a claim for insurance, from the April 19th storm in 2015, or did they, you want to find out as much as you can. And, the listing agent, hopefully, has said like, oh yeah, we did. We got a clean bill of health, from that event and et cetera. But still, I would turn around. It's a significant, that's a significant cost. I mean, that's a ticking time bomb. Even if you get it covered by insurance on a good day, usually now there's 2% deductible. So that's still a lot of out-of-pocket expense. Even if a roofer is helping, the homeowner make up the cost of the deductible, it's harder to do, I mean, now with higher deductibles. So, it's you would know that before you get to inspections, number one. You would already be talking about the roof before you ever, executed a contract, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, I think during inspection, you really want to get a roofer out there, not just the inspector. There's some really good inspectors, and there's some inspectors that use binoculars and a ladder. That's not going to be good enough to say that roof is, So another thing I hate talking about are life expectancies, because a roof, it'd be unusual, but I've seen it. I mean, that they can go on, they can exceed 20 years in life. That would be, rare, but I've seen it. Sure, the average would probably be 12 to 15 years before it's, through an insurance claim or something on the own or on the seller's behalf, they replace it. But I don't know if I'm answering your question about the roof, but I mean, that's something that would not be a surprise, in the inspection period, because you will have already talked about that, in negotiating up front and looking at the seller's disclosures.
So I'm assuming, let's take it from the listing side, that you've already had this conversation and added that into the price of your house.
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes. I mean, yes, we've talked about it, yes. Have we factored that always into the price? No. Sometimes I feel like, again, depends on market conditions, right? Supply and demand.
Yep.
Now with a little bit softer market, depending on the price point. No, I mean, like Chance Song, we replaced that roof right before we listed it. I mean, I was very forceful about that we needed to do that. There's been a few others here recently that they've replaced the roof right before listing it. That's important for us to be competitive.
Yeah.
Um, so does it so? But might I list a home that's with a 12-year-old roof, and we might still be, on the high price per square foot? Yeah. If we've looked at it, it's tight, it's doing what it's supposed to do, has not reached its, obviously it's not failing. We've looked in the attic. We've done those things before we put it on the market. So now, it could take a weather event tomorrow night that might, the straw that breaks the camel's back. That happens too. But, no one rushes to replace a roof unless they need to, unless there's evidence of that. But there's a lot of factors that will prolong the life of a roof.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of factors that will shorten the life of the roof. I mean, if there's tree limbs hanging all over the house and squirrels are having a heyday, you know, and or the branches really, what happens with tree limbs, when they're hanging over the roof, of course, when they're just wiping off on a windy day, wiping off the protective granular layers, you're going to shorten the life of your roof, so anyway.
Well, what you said there's 4 points to negotiations in the contract, potentially 4. So what is your third?
Well, 4 rounds, I guess is what I was saying. So round one is really, you have negotiating the contract. Round two is, your option period inspections. Round three is the financing approval deadline. We want to get over that hurdle. And round four is appraisal. That's a standalone contingency.
So let's go to the third one. So the financing appraisal or financing contingency. So the big one I see, and please add if you see something different, is that we're getting closer to deadline. We don't have financing approval, and the buyer wants an extension.
Well,
What
so
do
I'm
you
going to
do?
be wearing the hat representing the seller.
Mhm.
So right up front, I think it's really important when you're representing sellers before you execute a contract that you get to know. If you don't know the lender, you pick up the phone and get to know the lender. And because there's good lenders, just like there's good realtors and bad realtors, there's good lenders and bad lenders, and a lot of it has to do with their due diligence, screening process, so on and so forth. In my opinion, a good lender, there should be no surprises. It would be rare if there are surprises. And that would be, well, gee, the buyer didn't tell us this. You know what I mean? So I get that. I mean, but good lenders know the appropriate questions to really vet out that client up front. So that's number one. I like to shorten, the financing approval deadline. That is that due diligence period of time for the borrower to get busy and to get everything that the lenders asked for, so that doesn't mean all the conditions are cleared and all of that, but I like to try to shorten that when I can. I like to shorten it where I can. I don't buy into that it has to be 21 days or that, whatever else. I have done many that are 14 days. Right now I'm representing a buyer and we waived it altogether because I have absolutely no concern. They are getting a loan, but we don't need it. And so that made us very strong to the seller, and yet at the same time we were also very aggressive on price, so because they don't have to worry about a financing contingency. We waived it. So
What if
we didn't
someone does though? What if I'm the buyer's agent and you're the listing agent and my buyer needs a 7-day extension? How would how
I'm
would
not
you
very
handle that?
forgiving. I'll be honest, I'm not very forgiving of that because I feel like if they've already, let's just use 21, okay, 21, they've already had 21 days for financing approval, and then now they're asking on the 20th day or the 21st. I'm not very patient with lenders that kind of wake up and like, oh, okay, well, we need a little bit more time. They've had the time, and if they've exposed their client, the borrower, in such a way where, sorry. I mean, I'm just, there would have to be a really good reason. There would have to be a really good reason why they need more time. And hopefully I'm not finding out about it in the 11th hour.
I would agree on that. That's definitely doesn't make for a great agent if they're calling the listing agent, telling them right then.
Well,
Um,
and I think that's why, we don't, um, I love what we do because it's a very humbling business. Listen, I mean, I'm humbled every day. I love what we do because it's very humbling. Every day I think there's an opportunity to learn something from every transaction that you do, et cetera. So I'm not at all talking like, oh, gee, we all, all these things. I'm just saying, as a general answer and response, um, it would have to be
Nicely at the
very,
door, I
very
think.
extreme circumstances why we would be extending a financing approval, in my opinion.
yeah, absolutely. So I want to go ahead. Thank you, Joanne, and I want to go ahead and wrap up here in a minute. I do want you to um, say, and in conclusion, if there's anything you'd like to add around being a great negotiator or how to approach the contracts with negotiation, and then we'll leave a few minutes for questions in the chat. So, what would you like to leave them?
Well, I mean, first, thank you for asking me to share. I mean, listen, I think we all learn by sharing. And so I really believe in that phrase, giver's gain. I don't know that I'm a great negotiator. I'm not saying that. I enjoy negotiating. It's kind of like cooking. I enjoy cooking. That doesn't make me a great cook. But, um, but I really enjoy negotiating. I think that is probably, when you're trying to, as an agent, trying to differentiate yourself from others, um, experience sure is fantastic if you've got those notches in your belt. If you don't, but I think just advocating in your client's best interest, when you say that, I think that really comes down to your market, you know negotiating skills. Negotiating. So anyone can run comps on a home. I don't think everyone interprets comps, the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not a science; it's an art. And um, so, there have been times where too. I mean, I could say days on market longer days on market have accounted to because we overreached on price. I mean, but you proactively drive that train. We're always in the driver's seat. And so again, it's an honor to share with whoever today, but I wouldn't say I'm a great negotiator other than I enjoy negotiating, and I think that is a critical skill for a good realtor.
So it sounds like, and just before we ask questions, for anyone who doesn't have the experience, you said know the market. Is there any classes, any books, any videos you would recommend around negotiating skills for them?
You know what? I mean, no, quite. Mine probably came a little bit from experience of settling, property insurance claims. Um, so I don't know that I do. Um, but know your product. Know your product. I think anyone can walk up to a home and know what the pros and cons are. And I think the more property, that tangibility, you got to get out there and taste and feel it and smell it. The market. And so especially getting started. I mean, I did open houses. I previewed homes. I went to Groe. I wanted to learn neighborhoods and da 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 and all that. So that's how you really know your playing field. You've got to know. You've got to know your playing field. And know your client. Yeah, I think that rapport and trust. For anyone, warm business trumps cold business any day of the week. Not that cold business is bad. I mean, if someone could, I need to go to an expireds class. If I wish I had a system for working expireds, I really do. But I, you know, I, I've got a lot of room for growth for myself too. But I mean, I would just say, experience would be know your market, and you don't have to have as a new agent. You don't have to attribute that to, oh, gee, I've closed X million this year or something. I mean, because that's probably not real. It just depends, right? If you're getting
Yeah,
started. So.
absolutely. Well, thank you, Joanne. Any questions that you guys have, we're going to leave it open for a minute or two. If you can type it into the chat bar, I'd be happy to ask her.
The chat bar, is that something you see?
Yep, I have the administrative view, which, and anybody who's on the web, people can call in or go on the webinar, and there should be a chat feature on it. Um, it doesn't look like there's any questions. You must have covered it all, Joanne. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're so busy. We really appreciate you being on this
Oh God,
call.
we're all busy, right? I always say that's relative. I mean, we're all busy, but anyway, it's all good. So, listen, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening.
Okay, you too.
Bye, guys.
Uh-huh.